Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. My name is Paul Rosen. I am the executive chairman of Global Go Cannabis, the cannabis industry's #1 go-to resource for a wide range of consulting and advisory services. Welcome back to our ongoing webinar series where we identify highly relevant and important topics to the emergence of the cannabis industry and bring in some of the thought leaders to explore each week's topic. Today's subject matter is cannabis best practices, securing premises, protecting against theft, and avoiding employment litigation. With more jurisdictions legalizing cannabis seemingly by the day, the industry is increasingly vulnerable to theft and diversion. An effective strategy to secure your business requires an understanding of exposures and appropriate risk management techniques. Today's panel is going to discuss with industry leaders proper security and employee protocols, proactive risk mitigation efforts, as well as crucial insurance coverage for businesses to implement within their cannabis operations. I know it doesn't sound like the sexiest topic, but this is one of the most important topics that we're really going to face as an industry. And having come from a non-regulated industry and now having worked in a regulated industry for a number of years, employee theft is always an issue or something that we should be mindful of. But here's the difference. If I'm running a convenience store and an employee steals from the convenience store, that's a drag. That property was misallocated and it no longer is something that the business can use to derive revenue. It's a loss. However, that's the end of the liability. They don't take away your business license. In cannabis, if a controlled substance like cannabis finds its way out the back door, it's a much bigger issue than just having an otherwise integral asset taken away from the company. It puts the company's livelihood in jeopardy because the fundamental fiat of a license is thou shalt not divert. Everything that is grown or processed or extracted in a licensed facility must be rigorously tracked through the regulated system all the way to a regulated dispensary. So having an employee walk product out the back door isn't just your typical, well, you stole from us. It threatens the very license that we operate under. So the pressure and the responsibility and the sort of onerous nature of this falls very heavily on cannabis companies because we face greater liability should we face certain types of employee theft or diversion. And we're going to understand that a little bit more detail today with some of our thought leaders providing content. Just before we get to our panel, I want to remind everyone that Global Go is pleased to provide our webinar series at no charge. We think it's important to make the best ideas available to this industry available for no charge, but we do encourage our attendees that find benefit to, instead of paying to attend, make a donation to our webinar charity partner, which is the Last Prisoners Project. Those of you that are in the industry should know Last Prisoners Project is the incredible organization that is freeing people from federal incarceration for doing the very same thing that we're celebrating in a public forum today. I can't think of any cause more critical to the soul of this industry than Last Prisoners. So we encourage all attendees that find value today to make a small donation. We recommend $100, but whatever you can afford, more or less. Understand that this money goes directly to the most righteous cause of all, seeking release, amnesty, or clemency for people in federal prison for possession of cannabis. Absurd that we're saying such a thing, but it's still very much a live issue, and we're far away from the type of amnesty that we need to reset the sort of social justice meters of this industry. Okay, let's get on to the program. Today's moderator is my good friend, my business partner, and my colleague at Global Go, Ryan Fingerhut. Ryan, like myself, is the former practicing attorney, but he's devoted himself full-time to the cannabis industry since 2014. We're both OGs, I guess, Ryan and I have been at it for just about the same length of time. Ryan's focus is on cannabis consulting, licensing, and compliance, and his team, or our team, boasts a 99% success track record in license applications. You heard me right. That's 99% success rate. With over 100 state and local cannabis licenses won in multiple states. Ryan also boasts a perfect record in relation to compliance with cannabis regulations. He's participated directly in the management of several cannabis businesses, and he really is one of the bright lights and thought leaders in our industry. Ryan, take it away.
Thanks, Paul. I will do my best after that glowing introduction. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Global Go panel. We've got some really great and exciting professionals here to talk to you about how to secure your business and stave off risk and liability, both physically and financially, as well as how to protect yourself from overstepping and maybe getting yourself into a little bit of trouble. So without further ado, let me introduce my esteemed panelists. So the first is Ms. Alana Long, who is a commercial insurance broker at IQ Risk Insurance Services. She prides herself on helping cannabis and hemp operators to get the best possible insurance cover for the best possible premiums. And as an insurance broker, Alana works with her clients to ascertain their needs, shop policies to multiple insurance carriers, and leverage her extensive relationships to present numerous options so business owners can make smart and informed decisions. Alana specializes in general and product liability, property insurance, workers' compensation, directors' officers' liability insurance, and many of the other coverages that are going to be able to protect you and your business should the worst happen. Currently, Alana manages the cannabis insurance portfolio and services for over 100 dispensaries, manufacturers, cultivators, consumption lounges, delivery services, and distributors. And in case I didn't do her full justice, Alana, if you'd like to introduce a little bit more about yourself and your company, please go ahead.
Well, I think you did, so thank you very much, but very excited to be here with everyone today. I'm Alana Long. I have branded myself as the Weed Queen and love working in this space. I've been helping cannabis and hemp operators for the last 5 years. I've got, every single type of operator, and I would just love to be a resource for you and your team. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Oh, great, thanks, Alana. So our next esteemed panelist is Miss Agnès Sullivan, who is a partner with Zuber Lawler, which is a national law firm that has a great deal of experience in the cannabis sector. So Miss Sullivan focuses on complex commercial litigation with an emphasis on white-collar criminal, healthcare, and employment litigation. She possesses experience at every phase of litigation, from intake through trial, and has successfully litigated matters in state and federal courts, as well as in arbitrations. Ms. Sullivan's employment experience includes both single plaintiff and class action matters, including matters involving wrongful termination, discrimination, harassment, retaliation, disability accommodations, and wage and hour disputes. And if, aside from the fact that we're going to be dealing a lot with talking about how do you protect yourselves against theft, including theft that might involve employees, Ms. Sullivan's really going to talk to you as well about some of the more common missteps that I see new entrepreneurs get into, where they come into the space. They're very mindful of security, but maybe not so mindful of the liabilities that they might create if they could overemphasize that security. So Ms. Sullivan, I'm not sure if you, oh, there you are, sorry. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit further, please?
Thank you, Ryan. You can call me Agnès. I'm Agnès. I'm counsel at Zuber Lawler, and I've been there for about 5 years. I've been practicing for over 15 years, and the last 10 years or so, I've been doing a lot of employment law, and the last couple of years, I've had a lot of cannabis clients, so I'm happy to be here. Excited.
Great, thanks for having me. Yeah. So next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Michael Sidore, MBA. Michael is the Senior Vice President of Business Development at CanGen Insurance Services, where he sits on the executive team. He is tasked with developing and executing CanGen's strategic marketing direction to accelerate growth through expanding the company's brand awareness, product suite, and nationwide distribution network, as well as enhancing broker education and channel management. Prior to joining CanGen, he spent 10 years as a senior director of client and broker management in the West Zone for Alliance Global Corporate and Specialty, and spent 4 years with Allied Insurance and Sales and Distribution Management. Michael, that's pretty impressive accolades, but would you like to discuss a little bit more about your background and how you can help the budding cannabis entrepreneur enter the space?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ryan. And I'm thrilled to be joining my other fellow panelists with this discussion. Yeah, I have been in insurance industry for closing in on 20 years. And then the cannabis space, I joined CanGen in January of 2020 and could not be more thrilled to partner with Alana and many other terrific brokers in this space to help bring our best in breed solutions to the market. So thank you for that, and excited to participate in the discussion.
Great to have you, Michael. So last but not least is actually an old friend of mine who I've worked on a few applications with, Mr. Robert Doering, who's the CEO of Ison Digital. He has 35 years of experience in technology applied to business management and electronic security. He's developed fully integrated electronic security and centralized monitoring projects for hundreds of clients in high-risk industries, including medical marijuana, adult use cannabis, jewelry, pawnbroking, high-end retail. He has also worked with retail chains, logistics, government, and hospitality firms throughout the Americas. And when I say Americas, I do mean North and South America, multiple countries. Roberto, provides expert advice in the use of security technology to create homogeneous security and operational management throughout organizations with multiple facilities and a culture of safety and performance improvement. And Roberto, I'm not sure if I left anything out there, but if you'd like to introduce yourself, please do. Oh, you're on mute, Roberto.
Oh, I'm sorry. The geek in the room forgot to mute his microphone. Anyway, thanks, Ryan. Good seeing you again. You kind of said it all, but one thing that is important to mention is that I really specialize in dealing with high-risk industries. I've been doing this for over 20 years and always dealing with industries that have high risk and high cash management, which pretty much encompasses cannabis, and also specializing in trading solutions in which you're able to control very volatile and difficult to control inventory, which is also something critical to the industry. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberto. So I think, this next question, the first question, is for the group, but I think I'll start off with you, Roberto, just because I think you're the first link in this chain, which is when it comes to security and liability risks, from your perspective, what are the top ones in the cannabis industry, and you know, what is it that you focus on when you come in and somebody says, protect me?
So the number one is actually the employee theft. The reality is that in designing and protecting cannabis business, you have to take several things in consideration, but internal theft, as Paul mentioned on the introduction, is absolutely critical because, again, you can lose your license because of small internal theft. The other part of it is really the loss of compliance. You not only need to design a system that meets compliance, but exceeds in order to be able to provide operational excellence in terms of using technology to help you actually run the business. And of course, you need to be aware of, depending on whether you're in retail, manufacturing, or cultivation, you also need to think about external theft and robberies. But I will say that internal theft is the biggest one. And the last item that I focus on is, you know, I deal with a lot of cannabis cultivators and for that matter, 10, 12 other industries, all in high risk, in which people think, oh, but do I really need that camera? And that camera could be in a stairwell that has no product, has nothing to do with product. But the reality is that if an employee falls on that stairwell, you may end up with a huge lawsuit. So those are the critical elements that I see.
Got it. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of follow-up there, but let me just go throughout the group, and I'll kind of go reverse from how I introduced you guys. Michael, would you like to make a comment about how you view risk in the cannabis industry and where you see the biggest low-hanging fruit for what you do?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ryan. Absolutely. And absolutely, I think employee theft and internal theft is the lion's share of probably a lot of the instances that we see. Either that or a lot of the outside crime is maybe tip-off crime and other stuff. So I think that everything Roberto shared is spot on. There's also standard crime from outside, the staying in compliance issues that you mentioned, as well as think new and evolving things like data breaches because of all of the data and information that you're gaining from your clients and everything else. Having to properly be able to protect the privacy and everything of your clients is staying in compliance for that is really, really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, if I could ask you just a quick follow-up question there, because there's something that I've seen in the cannabis industry, which isn't just, well, it's data theft of patients, but it's also data theft of IP and people who are repurposing packaging and, you know, selling black market stuff and what appears to be a white market packaging or anything like that. Is that also something that you deal with, Michael, or is that a little bit outside of it?
Sure. So these are they're all emerging industry emerging experiences within the industry. So that our coverage suite is actually expanding to be able to take on some of these exposures as well. I think overall, when you look at the insurance industry when it comes to cannabis, it's been trailing behind some of the traditional commercial industries, and I think that CanGen itself has done a fabulous job at creating a product suite that's really broad and encompassing for it. But we are continuing to add on products and everything to it. So coverages such as directors and officers, cyber insurance, and the like are all things that are being brought on to expand the suite, this year. So.
Great. Yeah. And I have to say, as somebody who's been in the cannabis space now for 7-8 years, the leaps and bounds that we've seen from insurance and other professional services as they've increased what's available to the cannabis industry has been really amazing, and I think has really altered the trajectory of the industry. And with that, Alana, I know you're right on the cutting edge of that. So let me pass the microphone over to you for the same question I just gave to Roberto and Michael.
Of course. Well, to speak on the cyber liability insurance, I've been selling that to operators since 2017, and it has definitely come in handy with crop trade secrets. If they have been received a ransomware note saying you must pay us this or we're going to release this. Same thing with HIPAA information on dispensary clients. So having a cyber liability policy is just crucial and actually not as expensive as you would think. And then back to what I think are the biggest issues in this space would definitely be crime. And I've seen a lot of different claims in this space, and sadly, it's mostly theft claims. From the outside, I've seen people come in and steal wire copper wiring in a building and completely ruin all tenant improvements. I don't know if that was a disgruntled employee, if that was a competitor, but completely ruin that. I've seen indoor cultivators that in 3 minutes, someone was able to break in and steal all the finished dry goods, and somehow they're able to get that alarm off as well. And then from disgruntled employees, I recently had a woman that was she was fired, and then she was came the next day into a warehouse and was able to damage 13 vehicles in about 5 minutes before the cops came because they did not change the credentials on her key fob. So that is just, I would say, the #1 thing to do if anyone is let go. So it's been crazy but fun, and there's coverage for all of this in place.
Yeah, well, that's really great to know that there's coverage out there for that type of thing. And I myself have seen a few issues from improper offboarding of former employees. So yeah, it's definitely a good point. Thanks, Alana. And Anya, so all of that, as well as let me just also challenge you to say if there's anything that Roberto, Michael, or Alana said that you as a lawyer, like, that might get you in trouble.
No, I actually agree with them. I think one of the big things that I see is not just physical assets, but I think Michael mentioned it, or you mentioned it, Ryan, is intellectual property, which sometimes can be much more valuable than physical assets. And IP theft is estimated that it costs U.S. companies as much as $600 billion a year. So this includes like a formula, a device, a pattern, compilation of data, anything like that. Then, and what I see is that a lot of employers are not protecting it. They consider it as a trade secret. They consider it valuable, but they're not protecting it. And so what you see is I had a case where the employees kind of got together and they were stealing all this information and like client lists and everything. And then they went and started a competing business. So then there was a lawsuit and and an injunction. And so this happens a lot in this industry, in the cannabis, I think, because a lot of stuff is new and everyone's kind of coming up with new ways to do things and manufacture and produce. And so it's very important to protect your intellectual property as well. And then generally the risks are just not following the laws. I think it's really helpful to, when you're starting a business, to have an attorney just to advise you on whether you're, to have a handbook to advise you on whether you're doing things right, because it can eliminate problems down the line.
Great. Yeah, I think absolutely true. People don't use attorneys enough, though I'm sure everybody on the webinar just sides themselves, but it's a highly regulated industry. And so there's a lot of pitfalls there. Roberto, I'm going to bring it back to you because there's a lot that's been said. We've gone a little bit afar from physical security, but I think a lot of what we talked to has touched upon that, as well as I know that you yourself have a lot of expertise in some of the digital security too. So my next question is, we talked a lot about what are the kind of things you need to worry about in the cannabis industry. What do you think, Roberto, are some of the must-have mitigating steps that any business owner should be taking to kind of deal with some of these risks?
One of the key things actually that is not even a product is people, is the actual staff. Having a well-trained, engaged staff when it comes to security, and mind, I work with cannabis, I work with pawn shops, jewelry stores, all sorts of high-risk environments. And the reality is that, especially on the retail side, if you just have a staff that is fully engaged, that will actually greet the customer or the patient right away and look them in the eye and say hello. I mean, there's reasons why if you enter an Office Depot, you get greeted within 20 seconds or 20 feet from the door. Having an engaged staff, well-trained, plays a big role in doing that. I mean, I use video technology to actually provide training tools for people to better prepare their staff. That's one of the things. And that gets done in the following fashion. Many times you need to catch your employees doing the right thing and showing it. Everybody thinks of cameras like, I'm gonna catch everything that these people are doing wrong. But in my 20 years that I've been doing this, when I work with a client and I change their mentality to understand that those cameras are recording everything and you can catch the good and the bad. And if you focus on showing the good, you're going to have a completely different business culture. That plays a huge role. I always work towards that side. So showing that you're watching, but you're watching in a positive way, it's a great thing, okay? Another thing, do not cut corners. This is absolutely critical. How many clients come to me and say, hey, I just want to reach compliance, do the minimum to get compliance. And in California, for example, the recording requirements are crazy. You go to other states, Pennsylvania, you have to have in the cloud for like 2 years. Those are things that government requires that do not really help the operations, but you have to do. But you end up, for example, putting one camera in the corner of the room or cutting down on doors that you're going to put access control, and that will cost you dearly later. The reality is that cannabis as an industry is growing, is evolving, and what you see happening a lot is that people are trying to just get in with the minimum possible investment sometimes, or they're already stretched because the government is requiring 1,000 things of them to just get the business open. But that will end up costing their license or costing their profitability or ability even to compete. I mean, as more and more companies come into the cannabis, it will become the next restaurant industry, retail industry, in which if you're not really effective, really good at what you do, you're not going to be able to survive. So you need to build your facilities in such level, and that will help mitigate all the risks that you have. Another thing, for example, and Alana mentioned the fact that they were able to come in and steal all the dry goods in 3 minutes. I had seen jewelry stores with steel gates in front that people will come with a saw and cut a door on the gates in like 2 minutes. In 3 minutes, they were out with all the jewelry. So that happens. That will happen. Now, how do you protect against that? A lot of cities and governments and states, they require, for example, that you have a 24-hour man guard on premises, an armed guard on premises. That doesn't really help much. One of the things that I always recommend is to put perimeter surveillance, perimeter protection. Have it off-site connected to a central monitoring station, especially if you're not required by the local regulators to have that 24-hour armed guard on premises. Protecting this way at nighttime is way better. There's artificial intelligence technology that will surround the building with a layer of protection that nobody will even get to the building. They don't have the time to actually get to do that or cut it. The last thing, my perspective, I always try to help the client not only understand what is the surveillance or access control and burglar and perimeter protection infrastructure that is put in place, but also how to better match your SOPs to take advantage of that. Sometimes people put technology, but they don't adequate their SOPs to operate according to what the technology can offer, and you end up first losing productivity. You're wasting some of the effort and the money that you put into that solution, and you end up having subpar security because you don't even know how to use it and how to adjust how you operate to take the advantage of what's taking place there or what's being put in place. I'll give an example, classical. We put cameras in a room that will do, for example, packaging in a cross view, but we also put cameras that are on top of where you actually do the process, because you need to see the transactions from all angles without you being able to make something disappear. For example, I'm holding my phone. If I just turn around, I can hide my phone with my hands. So having the cameras in the right positions are absolutely critical to make this work. If your SOP allows them to just pull the table to the center of the room and is not under the camera anymore, or they just start improvising because they're too busy, that's where you end up with your losses. So those are the things that I have. Those are my points here.
I think that's great. And I think you actually kind of wrap that around full circle, because you started off talking about, just having a good atmosphere for your employees and properly trained employees. Then you spoke about not cutting corners when it comes to installing the security. And I'm going to love to get Alana and Michael's take on that, because I think that's perfect for insurance. What am I spending a few $1,000s extra on the cameras versus what am I really protecting, which is a multi-million-dollar business. And then finally, you're talking about the SOPs and updating the SOPs, which, to your point, if you don't train your employees on how to use that security equipment and nobody turns on that alarm, then what's the point of having the alarm? So yeah, those are all really great points. And Alana, Michael, I'm just going to kind of toss it out to the both of you. Everything that Roberto said, and then also just from your standpoints, how do you mitigate all of these risks that we've been talking about so far? Do you think any of what Roberto says would have an impact on what it is that you do, or are there other alternatives you might suggest? And I'll just let the both of you kind of address as you see fit.
Well, I can definitely speak on what Roberto said about creating a good culture in your company. If you have loyal employees that don't steal from you and want to protect your business, I think that is crucial. I have a large manufacturer that every year they do an employee, first they give them a wellness week off. So these employees feel appreciated after they work so hard. Then they give them an employee appreciation weekend, and they actually take all their employees up to a farm. It's a huge party. Everyone's bonding. The owners come and take them to a dinner where the owners literally just speak to them and say, thank you so much for helping me pursue my dream. All of you are a huge part of this. And that in the past 5 years that I've worked with this client, there's been no inside jobs here. These employees respect these owners and the job that they're doing, and definitely want to protect the business, which I think is huge. So really important thing is hiring good people, doing multiple interviews, background checks, calling all referrals. I would not just hire the first person that comes along and says they can do this job. And then onto the physical side, when you work in insurance, you need to have all security protocols in place for a theft claim to be covered. So that means if you're a dispensary or a manufacturer, you need to have everything locked in either a safe, which may be too small if you're a large manufacturer. So you could have a DEA cage that actually wraps around all of your products, or you have these new facilities that are actually custom built vaults. So I work with Mike and the team at CanGen, and I actually send full pictures of the entire facility and every security protocol in place, and they check it off and say, yes, this is a custom vault. This would be very hard to get through here, and then theft can be covered that way. So I think that's huge. The security guards are obviously great. And then I would say ongoing audits of the facilities, just to do random checks and make sure everything is looking good. Mike, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Ilana. And this is, you really highlighted in a bunch of great areas which we focus on. Remember, at CanGen, we're a managing general underwriter. So we are, we essentially act like the carrier in terms of underwriting the risk. And these best management practices allow us to extend capacity and be able to provide coverages in other really challenging environments otherwise. So everything we said, from having the best practices, doing the background checks, bringing on the right employees and creating the right culture within the environment, to also everything Roberto said related to putting in, not just doing the minimum amount of requirements, but putting in the right equipment, the right processes, and auditing it and everything to make sure it's up to speed, can do it. Everything Ilana just highlighted on in terms of one of the biggest challenges in the industry, and to be able to be an operator who's successful and grows, means you need to be able to expand your insurance coverage to be able to grow with your business. And that's one of the biggest challenges. And being able to execute on these best practices, being able, similar to the jewelry store, which Roberto was discussing, guess what? You don't leave the diamonds in the window overnight. They need to go back at night and go into a safe and be under lock and key and protected, at least as a bigger deterrent to stall a criminal who's trying to do it. The same practices come into place in our industry. This is cash. It is, because of the banking situation, it's a very cash heavy and high value product heavy industry. And you need to have the right protocols. How much of the inventory you can have out on the floor at one time, and putting the inventory away in the properly approved vaults and safes and everything at night. And also having the access tracking and everything else so that you can properly monitor, and setting up good processes so that, while not intrusive, you take care of all the aspects to try, with cameras and processes, to try and manage the flow of goods with your employees and everything else to help minimize your exposures there. But ultimately, that all wraps together into the better management practices and execution, and the better they consult and use the tools we've discussed, the better insurable of a risk it is, and that both in terms of pricing and in terms of the capacity that we're able to put. And that allows them to be able to scale up and grow and expand their businesses. So these are all crucial things to help with the evolution of a cannabis business as it grows.
And Michael, I think that those are all really, really good points. And there's something that you and Alana said that I'd like to tie back to what Roberto said around cutting corners when it comes to security. Michael, I think what you seem basically just expressly said was that the types of security and the processes, the SOPs you have in place can directly affect your rate premiums. Is that correct?
Of course.
Yeah. And then Alana, just a clarifying question, because I've heard this and I believe it to be true, but I just want to be 100%. Are you saying that certain types of insurance around theft may only be applicable if you have if you meet certain security requirements around how you're securing your cannabis?
Yep,
Just
exactly. It means that there would only be coverage, let's say for fire. There would be no theft coverage if you don't have everything in place that you would need to work with you and Roberto's team. And yeah, there are a lot of rules, so that it's our job to educate the clients to make sure that before they start selling, that they know that they can get this covered if they do this every single night and never cut corners.
Yeah, and that's just something I wanted to emphasize for the audience, is that you should be talking to somebody like Roberto and somebody like Alana or Michael here simultaneously, because the money you're spending with Roberto could have immediate impact on how much money you can save with Michael and Alana, as well as whether or not Michael and Alana can really help cover your liability in the long run. So with that, Anya, I'd like to pass it over to you. First, is there anything that somebody should be doing to sort of protect themselves, mitigate their risks from a legal standpoint? And then second, I'd like to touch, and this will be a follow-up question, but I'd like to touch on anything probably that Roberto said that, you know, your little legal sense is tingling and you're thinking, well, if you've got cameras over somebody, or, you know, some of the more aggressive practices I've seen are, you know, searching employees as they leave. Is there any sort of areas where you definitely need to consult a lawyer before maybe you want to take those steps?
I think in general, what you have to do, no matter what you do, is to be consistent. If you are, you know, if you have your buddy or your, you know, best friend or whatever working, you can't treat them differently than you're treating everybody else. So if you're having everybody else, you know, do certain things, certain checks, or, you know, follow certain procedures, then you have to have everybody do that, because you're going to open yourself up to a discrimination claim otherwise. Another thing that was mentioned was background checks. And in general, it's not illegal for an employee to ask questions from an applicant about their background or to require a background check. But employers can't conduct a background check or use the information in a manner that denies equal opportunity to employees. So to anyone who's on a protected basis. So that means anyone, you know, you can't discriminate based on race, color, and national origin. So regardless of how you do the check, you have to comply with federal laws that protect applicants. And then in some states, particularly California, that's where I practice, California in 2018 passed a law that prohibits employers from asking job applicants on an application whether they have a criminal history. It's a new kind of area of law called ban the box legislation, where you have a box on the, you know, in an employment form where it says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? So that is in California and some of the states. In California, it's called the California Fair Chance Act. So it's a part of a national trend to kind of limit that, and so it's illegal in California. However, you can in California, and I think there are some other places, you can offer make a conditional offer of employment and then run a background check. And if something comes up, you know, a crime, something that you have to kind of notify the employee that, and then you have to do an analysis of basically what the job applicants, what the criminal history is, what the position is, and whether there would be any kind of impact. And then if you do find that there's, you know, that would not be a good fit, you have to tell them in writing. So there are requirements that you need to follow when doing background checks. So I would definitely consult with an attorney in that regard.
Great, yeah. Oh, and then I actually have a personal story related to that, where because our company is California based, and so we had to go through the ban the box, and we had a applicant who had recently been convicted for trafficking methamphetamine. And I had to write a whole report about why that would prohibit you from working in the cannabis industry. But yeah, that's very interesting and definitely worth taking. And in that light, I'd like to kind of toss the microphone out to the group for our next big question, which is really geared towards getting some stories like that. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you guys see people making in the cannabis industry, from a legal, from a security standpoint? Alana, Michael, from that standpoint, as well as if there's any type of special insurances that people maybe just don't know about that they should be looking for in the cannabis industry that don't normally apply in the traditional. But just for the group, if anybody's got a funny story about some pretty big mistakes or misses that people might have made, now's the time.
Yeah, I've got one. I just had a recent dispensary make the biggest mistake I think you could make. They had a fake Stizzy rep come in on the same day, but a kind of an hour earlier in the Stizzy uniform. And they actually asked for about $35K, which was the weekly revenue for this dispensary for Stizzy, without showing an invoice. And they talked to the manager. They knew the manager's name, kind of knew some other details, said that they forgot the invoice at their last dispensary, and they were sorry. And the manager handed over the $35K. So that cash is gone. The real representative came an hour later and said, what? And it just was a huge mistake. So that's just employee error, that, or if that wasn't an inside job, that does not matter. They did not have the right coverage for this. But if you do have an employee that is going to be dishonest to your company, there's actually a new policy. The insurance has evolved over the last 5 years that I've been in this space. And now CanGen offers an endorsement on the property. So usually property only covers third parties. So, you know, robbers from the outside coming in. And now there's an employee dishonesty up to $100,000. You can get dishonest acts covered for stolen cash or inventory. And it's only about, $2,000 for the year. And that also covers a lot of other things like outdoor property, property off premises, spoilage, transit coverage. So I would say if you have a policy in place right now, get this added on as soon as you can if you have an employee.
Hey, thank you, Ilana. That was a great testimonial, and I think that there's a couple of different things I wanted to hit on. Number one was in terms of examples. Well, the example we just kind of highlighted is true. When there was some civil unrest last summer, when different events were going on, and there was some political activity taking to the streets and stuff, a lot of people took that as an opportunity to do some mischief as well. And the end result was that some of the dispensaries and some of the downtown areas, many of the metropolitan areas were impacted. I can tell you we had an instance where one did not put the diamonds back in the safe at the end of the night. So they left all their cannabis inventory out on the showroom floor during the night, and they were impacted, and it was a major loss. And you know what? The policy stipulates that best practices and these procedures need to be followed for the claim to be able to be processed, right? I mean, it's part of the risk management and controls in place. And so ultimately, that operator suffered a severe loss and wasn't able to recuperate much of what was done as a result of that. But I also, so that's a great example just of the processes and the best practices are in place, and if they execute on them, there's a great opportunity to get great coverage and great capacity. But you do have to manage that. With regards to what Ilana was just alluding to, absolutely being able to provide that, and also when product is off premises. So the difference between the cannabis coverages and some of the traditional commercial coverages, and even when people are trying to use traditional coverage to write on some cannabis accounts, is more often than not, oftentimes they're not covering the product when it's off premises and the product when it's in transit. And these are really, really crucial areas because the industry, in terms of both the cash flow because of the banking situation and the high value product, that's oftentimes where it's most vulnerable. And so having good coverage in place, both to cover employee dishonesty, as she mentioned, but also policies like motor truck cargo, where both an owner and or a transporter have coverage for both cash and for the cargo itself are crucial. Now, to get those good coverages and to get it in the limits and the higher limits that some of the better operators need, there are stringent guidelines, practices about the equipment needed for the vehicles, about where they can be loaded, about where they can stop and everything else, and even follow cars or onboard cameras inside and out, all monitored, all of the above. But if these controls are followed, this is really what's going to help mitigate one of the biggest exposures, which is the product and the cash when it's off premises. So wanted to add that to the discussion.
And I'd say making sure that your vehicles are with a cannabis auto carrier, because otherwise the carrier can deny a claim if they did not know that you're a cannabis business distributing money. Also, not just a typical motor truck cargo policy, it needs to be through a cannabis carrier as well, so they know that there's very high valued stock in there, and it's likely that you could get pulled over versus another type of business.
And Roberto, I'm about to toss it over to you because I'm sure you have a ton of stories in this area. But
Just a few.
Before we do, I just wanted to ask Anya to comment there on that, because I think that that's a really good point about the federal issues around cannabis and how that can sometimes invalidate policies and contracts. And if you could just speak to that real quick, Anya, and if you want to share any stories that you might have, please feel free.
So stories I have, what I see in the cannabis industry is kind of a lot of handshake deals, a lot of agreements that are not in writing. So I have 2 lawsuits right now ongoing where they had an agreement and there was some investment, but it was unclear whether it was an actual business partnership or what. And so that happens a lot, and that's kind of separate from what was mentioned, but I just wanted to bring that up. So
Sure.
do not, I know if you're a friend, you've had a buddy from high school or whatever, do not get into an agreement where you're just like over drinks, where you make, one of them was actually like a piece of paper where it was like a memo of understanding that now we're fighting over, and that our client ended up doing really well. So now the guy is like, I own part of the business. But again, with regard to federal laws, I keep emphasizing this. What you have to do is just be consistent in anything that you apply, anything you do with employees. You just have to follow laws. You cannot discriminate. You cannot apply the laws unfairly or because you're going to open up, someone's going to say, well, the younger, non-minority counterpart was treated differently than I was. So, I don't deal a lot with the insurance aspect of it, but that's what I see a lot is people who don't, or my favorite, sexual harassment. So, you have to be careful about what you say to your employees, how you speak to them, foster kind of a culture where they feel comfortable coming to you, where you're available. I think those things that help a lot in avoiding litigation.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So again, good culture and good culture, good SOPs, and don't cut corners. When you make multi-million-dollar deals, don't write it on the back of a napkin. So then, Roberto, let me pass it over to you then, because like I said, I'm sure you have a ton of stories. I've heard a few of them, though I don't know if we have time to share all of them. But
well, I want to just share a couple of stories just to illustrate how serious the problem is with internal theft and how serious it is for you not to have the proper coverage. I mean, in terms of best practices too, what I can mention is that not having insurance, not having legal advice, it's a huge mistake. Installing a whole security system, but not having a service plan that actually guarantees that things will continue to work, so you can actually focus on running the operations, knowing that the security in the background is working, is a huge mistake. But a couple of things. For example, I have dealt years back here in Florida with a Burger King that burgers were disappearing. Whole bags of burgers from the freezer were disappearing. Nobody knew how it was happening. until they actually put proper camera coverage, and they figured out that there was an employee that was shoving the whole bag of burgers inside his pants and taking to the bathroom and putting behind the toilet for his cousin to come into the bathroom and grab the bag and put into his pants and walk out of the place. How they managed to do that on those, you know, jogger pants, like exercise pants, amazing. So if they are stealing burgers at Burger King from the freezer and putting like a huge bag of frozen burgers inside their pants, you know, the temptation in the cannabis business is a little bit bigger. So making sure that you really have those controls and making sure that, you know, security is more about keeping people honest. That's the truth. Look, naturally, and I don't know the exact statistics, but typically 70% of people are honest. And you have like maybe 20% that under the right conditions, they're honest. And then you have like literally 2-3% who will try to steal from you no matter what. So there's a lot about keeping the whole security is about, you don't need to worry about the 70%. You can't really do much about the 3%, but you have to have everything in place to try to catch and make sure that you have a way to protect yourself, protect the business, and show that you did everything you could to prevent that. But if you let that 3% commit crimes, steal things without being caught, that's what would build a temptation for the other 20 who are saying, wait a minute, but I'm working like crazy here. This guy is slacking. And theft is not only about product. It's about, for example, just taking breaks every 50 minutes and being outside and slacking at work. So there's a lot of different things that impact the bottom line. So it's important to have that coverage. I just want to tell one more story from the time of before these guys here. Do you remember who came before these? The first thing Apple came up?
The flip phone or
the iPods?
the iPods, yes.
Yeah, we have the iPods that were like this big just to play music. Anyway, I started 20-something years ago, and I work a lot with pawn shops. And pawn shops were taking iPods to actually give loans on iPods, because they used to cost like $400 or $500 each. And what they did many times is that they had an employee and a pawn shop client of mine that what the guys were doing is that they would make a loan on the counter, and as they walk out back to the storage, the employee would, because the cameras were only in like poor positions that wouldn't cover the whole path with cross views to see the front and the back of the person, he will walk towards the back, grab a pack of batteries from the wall, and open the envelope with the back to the cameras, walking towards the storage, take the iPod out, put it in his pocket, put the batteries inside the envelope, and put it on storage. And then he would, after a while, when it's time to actually pay for the interest on the loan, he will use part of the money that he was collecting by selling iPods on the streets to pay the loans to keep the ball rolling. Long story short, in like 2 months, they had lost $25,000 in iPods.
Wow.
And a few battery packs from the wall.
Wow.
So, you know, those things are critical. And what I see in all these years and what I see happening to cannabis is that, you know, a pawn shop cannot make those mistakes too often or they're going to shut down. I know of pawn shops that got shut down because they found their safes full of rocks instead of diamonds and gold because of things like this. So cannabis is a different story, but the reality is that the competitive environment that is being created and the fact that you're going to have dispensaries popping up all over the place. If you don't become really good at what you do and really well protected and the operations run really smoothly, you're not going to have the margins to survive against companies that, you know, are working at a higher level of efficiency. I have one last comment here that I just wanted, actually kicking back a question to Anya, is about the fact that many solutions, when it comes to like customer service, especially on the retail environment, we like to, for example, add microphones to the cameras so you have audio and video that you can use that for training purposes. That's typically legal if you just post signs and you make sure, and I always recommend that my customers that they have the employees signing in their employment agreement that they understand that there will be audio and video recording. But I just wanted her opinion and see if she has any additional suggestions about that, because it is a real valuable tool. We got to be very careful with the HIPAA. If it's like a medical dispensary, I don't think you can really put microphones in the room where you're going to be having the consultation with a patient. That will be a little bit of a problem. But on the full retail environment, that's kind of legal. So I just wanted to throw that back to Anya to see what's her opinion on that.
Yeah, that's, I agree with you with the suggestion of having something in writing where the employee agrees. And with regard to clients, as long as there's signs posted, they're aware of it. You know, some states are a one-party recording state. California is a two-party, so both parties have to know that they're being recorded in order for it to be legal. But some states, as long as one party knows, it's fine. So, but I think generally just to be as a best practice and just to be cautious is to just have signs, let people know they're being recorded. If it's a phone call, let them know that they're, you know, this is what's happening. And if they don't want to be recorded, that they don't, you know, they can decline the service. But just as long as there is awareness and with employees to have acknowledgement that they understand this.
Okay. So I think we might be getting towards the end of the hour, but we haven't gotten kicked off yet. So I'll just leave that out there in case we do. But until then, I think, oh, there we go.
I saw a question that I can address if that's okay.
Sure.
I think there was a question from Kristen Hendrickson about what is the best way to protect IP and NDAs. Yes, so NDAs are a good way to protect intellectual property. Also, it is one way if you don't want to go through you know, the labor of having to draft an NDA is to have in your employment agreement or handbook rather a section that talks about your intellectual property, how it's valuable to the company, how by signing the employee handbook, the employee is agreeing that they're not going to use or distribute the intellectual property or the trade secrets of the company. And so also with your C-suite executives, you want to have regular meetings. You want to let them know what is the company's. First of all, you have to know what it is, and so protect it. You know, with passwords, you have to understand what devices your employees are using. Do they have and access to any of the information on their personal devices? Is anything on a cloud? So you have to basically be very diligent in protecting it, because if you're in court, if you're in the position where you're filing a lawsuit and you're in court, you have to defend the fact that you protected this, that you had passwords, that not everybody has access to this information, that, you know, only certain people on a need-to-know basis had access. So, but an NDA is always advisable, you know, too.
Great. And then I think there was actually one other question that popped up in the chat, and Alana, I think you might have been responding to it in there. But in case, just for the general viewing public, Alana or even Michael, are there any types of insurance policies or places where people should be looking if they're doing a cannabis operation outside of the US?
And I'll respond as we do have a sister company, Next Wave Canada, and they handle all the Canadian opportunities. It is something where you have to partner with a local Canadian broker in order to have that placement, but we can absolutely help make those connections. Next Wave Canada is the biggest player up in that space for that business. Fantastic solutions up there as well. And also remember, it is federally legal up there. So there are different environments and the capacities and everything dealing with those industrial or larger facilities. In fact, they have capacities even up to 100 million TIV for property coverage because it is federally legal, and the public and private money have built some mega industrial facilities in order for that industry. So so the needs are higher, but absolutely. So we will absolutely, we could provide contact info for to make that connection with our team up there.
Great. And I should also remind everybody, all attendees will be getting an email in the next 24 to perhaps 72 hours. I don't want to put too much pressure on my tech people with everybody's contact information who's been on this panel, because there have been a few questions looking for contact information for everybody. So, yeah. And with that, I will pass the microphone back to Paul.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, esteemed panelists. For those of you that are not in the cannabis industry, you're probably thinking, oh my God, why in God's green earth would I ever want to jump into this industry? It just sounds like it's worry upon risk upon worry. And the answer is yes, but as we know, risk and return are intimately related. And there is a real emphasis on compliance for a good reason, because we are operating potentially very valuable businesses where there is some threat to the public good, as there is in any business, but you can't look at these costs of compliance as a headache or as a headwind. You have to see it as sewn to the DNA of your company. And if you can master that, you're putting your company into a very strong position, because the type of discipline and organization you need to get on top of compliance is very much similar to the type of skills you need to actually run a business. Measure 3 times, cut once is a good ethos. So I think that really what today should be is an invitation to not let the emotions around these concerns overwhelm you, and see it as a simple tic-tac-toe, where if you take the right steps, you can largely avoid some of the pitfalls that are otherwise in the horizon if you don't take the right steps. So this is the nature of our industry. It's not going to change anytime soon. If anything, we're going to notice as new jurisdictions come down, they triple down on compliance, turn it into a winning hand for your company rather than something that you just have to kind of shrug and deal with. I want to thank, first of all, our moderator, Ryan Fingerhut, for doing a great job elucidating these issues, Alana and Charles, and sorry, we had a small change, and Agnès, thank you so much. Michael, I apologize, and Roberto for not naming you quickly. We had a few scrambles on our original speaker list, but the expertise that we all were able to tap in today is, in my opinion, invaluable. I wish I had such a resource available to me when I was the senior person in charge at my first Canadian LP in Canada. This would have been eminently useful to avoiding the type of heart palpitations I faced many times when dealing with our regulator, Health Canada. I do want to also thank our sponsors that help make today possible. That's IQ Risk Insurance Services, LLC, that's ArcView, that's Cannabis, that's Zuber Lawler, that's CFN Media Group, and that's Last Prisoners Project, the charity that we encourage everybody to consider supporting. Hey, Global Go, our mandate here is to bring thought leadership to both opportunities and risks associated with the cannabis industry. And mostly we're focusing on all the upside, but it's really good to also focus on some of the, not downside, but some of the risks and the risk mitigation strategies that we can all embrace. See this as 2 sides of the coin. Excitement is great, euphoria is great, optimism is great, but these are really administratively cumbersome businesses, and getting on top of that is going to serve you well, regardless of where the cannabis industry may take you. Until next time, I'm Paul Rosen, looking forward to meeting again at our next webinar, probably next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yeah.